Do you believe in forgiving or forgetting?
I will not pretend I did not hear it, because every person at that table heard it and watched to see if I would crack, when his wife leaned in with that polite smile that always smells like a dare and said I should not speak because he is the father figure she chose. And for a second my mouth opened on its own like a reflex, the way your leg jumps when the doctor hits your knee, but I closed it again, not because I agreed, not because I was scared, but because I knew anything I said would be turned, clipped, passed around later as proof that I am difficult, and I am tired of handing out free knives to people who enjoy cutting me with them. It is strange how a room can go quiet without anyone lowering their voice, how the conversation keeps moving on the surface while underneath there is this heavy current of weight. What will she do? Because there were relatives and neighbors and a couple of my daughter's friends from school who have only ever seen me from a careful distance, and there was my ex performing Father of the Year with the easy rhythm of a man who has practiced his lines, and there was my daughter pretending not to notice me, which hurt in that specific way where you do not bleed, you just feel like your bones are tired, and even though I had planned to say something simple and kind about how proud I am, I folded the words and put them in my pocket. Because sometimes the real power is not in the toast you give, but in the one you deny them the satisfaction of twisting. They took my silence as proof they were right, which is their favorite mistake, and the little look started, the micro nods that pass like tiny gifts among people who think they are winning. While a server hovered with a tray and the check presenter sat near my water glass, because I had made the reservation and left my card, which no one seemed to remember. And I listened to stories where my contributions were repackaged as his wisdom and her management, and I thought about how many times I have paid for the thing and let someone else hold the mic, because I was trying to give my daughter a smooth runway and not a courtroom, and I realized in that moment that the runway had become a stage and I was being placed in the audience like an extra, applauding on cue. My daughter met my eyes once, quick as a blink, and I saw a flash of something that looked like embarrassment and then like stubbornness, and I understood that she was holding herself together with the story they had fed her for years. The one where I am emotional and reactive and always making it about me, and I wanted to reach across all the plates and say, I do not need to be your hero, I only need to be your mother, but I kept the words in my pocket. Because I know the difference between a speech that makes me feel better and a move that changes the board. So I stacked plates, the way I did when she was small, and we ate in shifts during those wild seasons when money was tight and time was tighter, and I thanked the server, and I signed the check without looking up. And when his wife asked if I could take a photo of the happy family, I took 3, made sure everyone was in frame, smiled, and handed the phone back without asking for one with me, and you could feel the confusion like a draft in the room. Because they expected the usual dance of me, begging for a spot in my own child's narrative, and I offered them nothing but courtesy and a clear exit. In the car I did not cry, I did not scream, I did not call anyone to replay the scene. I drove home with the air off and the window cracked just enough to remind myself I can breathe without permission. And I set my purse on the counter and opened my laptop and logged into the education account that has paid the deposits and the fees and the surprise charges no one posts about. The account I set up years ago in my name with automatic transfers that keep everyone comfortable, and I pulled up the permissions page and changed the disbursement so tuition would continue to be paid directly to the school on a fixed schedule, but no third party could move a cent. And no one could use my steady money to buy themselves applause at dinners where I am told to shut up and clap. Then I open the tax folder where my ex keeps asking me for copies of the old documents he lost during his last great reorganization, and I moved everything behind a new gate with a new key, and I drafted a short email I did not send yet. A factual line or two that simply states that I will no longer provide records on demand and that any future requests can go through the accountant he brags about, which is a polite way of saying, if you want to keep playing patriarch on my time, you can pay full price and wait your turn like everyone else. When the house went quiet and the dog settled at my feet, I texted my daughter a simple note that said I am home and I love you and I am proud of you, and I did not add a single word about the dinner or the photo or the line that cut me. Because my love does not need a courtroom, and I am done auditioning for a role I already own, and I put the phone face down and made a cup of tea I did not drink, and I lay on the couch and let silence build its own spine inside me. This morning the phone lit up with missed calls stacked one under the other until the screen looked like a timeline of panic. And the last voicemail ended with "Please talk to me" in a voice that sounded like the girl who used to ask me to stay in her doorway until she fell asleep, and I let it sit there while my heart tried to run through a wall. Because I will answer when the terms are different and not a second before, and maybe that sounds cold to people who have never had their love turned into a weapon against them, but if you were at that table you would understand. This is not punishment, it is clarity, and it is the first clean move I have made in a long time. So when I say I stayed silent, do not hear surrender, hear strategy, because I did not raise my voice or throw a glass or storm out. I put a steady hand on the lever they thought I would never touch, and the next sound they hear will not be me yelling. It will be the click of doors that used to open for free beginning to close, and I am curious to see who calls next when the applause stops and the bill finally lands where it belongs. People always want the quick headline about a divorce, a neat little caption they can repeat at church or in a group chat, so no one has to sit with the mess, and for years the headline he sold, with her smiling beside him like a spokesperson, was that I was the dramatic one who complicated simple things, the person who made storms out of drizzle, while he was the stable adult who kept files in order and paid things on time and showed up with a clipboard and a calm voice. And if you had not lived in my house and watched me hold down a full schedule and still read to a kid at night and still taped the soles of my shoes because the budget needed another month, you might have bought that headline without blinking. Because it is easier to believe a woman is chaotic than to admit a man might be lazy in a nice suit and convincing when he needs a favor. When we split, the custody schedule was a patchwork that looked fine on paper and felt like a lottery in practice, because any week he wanted to swap nights became a speech about flexibility and what a good mother would do for a child's happiness. And I said yes more than I wanted because I was still paying off the lawyer and because saying no cost me more than the time I lost, and every yes became another stone in the wall they built around my daughter, the wall that told her mom is hard work and dad is ease, and then along came the new wife with her crisp emails and her love of the words policy and calendar. And she started introducing herself to teachers as part of the core team while I stood 2 feet away holding the snack sign-up sheet like a volunteer who wandered in by accident. It was not that my daughter hated me, that would have been cleaner. It was that she slowly learned to treat me like the emergency exit behind glass, useful only if something is on fire. And the everyday affection went to the people who provided a constant audience and new phones and tickets to things that photograph well, and I am not blaming her because kids absorb the tempo of the room they live in. But there were nights when I sat in the parking lot after a game and did the math on what it cost me in hours and money to show up and clap and leave without a wave, and it chipped away at the part of me that believes effort balances the scales, because sometimes effort just feeds the story that you will keep showing up no matter how they treat you. I am not innocent in this either, and I will say that to you because we are talking like adults and I am not auditioning for sainthood, since there were times I corrected in the moment instead of waiting until we were alone. Times I sent a paragraph when a sentence would have been smarter. Times I made a point to prove I was paying when I should have let the receipt sit in the drawer and let the results speak later, but I can tell you the motive was not attention. It was fear that if I did not explain everything right now, the lie would harden while I slept, and by morning it would be the only version anyone remembered. The night after the graduation dinner, after I changed disbursements and moved documents and sent nothing that could be screenshotted as an attack, I opened the education account I started when she was in middle school. The one I fed with small amounts even when rent scared me, and I called the plan administrator and sat on hold long enough to memorize the pattern of their music. And I told the woman who finally came on the line that I wanted primary control with one rule only, which is that no disbursement would be approved unless it went directly to qualified tuition and housing in my daughter's name at her school, and that any request for travel, celebration, equipment not required by the course, or anything routed through a third party should be denied by default. And then I removed both of their view permissions, not because I want secrecy, But because I am done with my money being the backdrop for their public speeches and the engine for their performances where I am expected to sit in the wings and cheer at the right times. After that call, I went to the university portal and revoked all third-party proxies because somewhere along the way they had convinced a 19-year-old that privacy is rude to parents who pay. And I clicked the box that says any future access requests must be confirmed by me and the student together in writing, and I wrote a short note to the bursar stating that I will fund a scheduled payment plan, that I do not authorize any charges outside tuition and housing without direct consent from me and my daughter on the same email thread, and that I would appreciate all vendors tied to student life being locked from charging my card unless I physically log in, which sounds fussy until you have been the wallet at a table where you were told to keep quiet. You asked me once why I stayed in the same town after the divorce when moving might have been a clean restart, and I told you it was for my daughter. But the other truth is that I knew one day I would need to sit very still and let them talk while I made one careful move that could not be undone by a tantrum or a performance, and last night was that move. Not a slam of a door, but the turning of a deadbolt. And I slept better than I have in years because I did not dream about saying the right sentence at the right time. I dreamed about my calendar, clean and solid, with my own name on the approvals. This part may sound small, but it is the one that made me smile alone in my kitchen, because her stepmother loves a title and loves to email people with a subject line that includes words like coordination and leadership. So I went into the contact list for the school and removed her from every non-essential distribution I had added her to back when I was still trying to get along. And I added a note to the account that says all scheduling questions should be directed to the student or to me, which will not stop her from posturing, but it will stop her from using my access to posture, and the difference between those two things is the difference between being pushed out and stepping aside on purpose. By the time I shut the laptop, my phone had started its little dance on the counter, and while I did not answer, I looked at the names stacked on the screen and I understood what they were calling about, not apologies and not reflection, but logistics. Because once the machine spins and they need codes and statements and approvals, love suddenly looks like efficiency again, and I am fluent in that language, yet I will not speak it for free anymore, and as I walked to bed I felt that stubborn, steady peace you get when you know you have stopped arguing in a room where no one listens and started changing the locks instead, and if that sounds like revenge, good, because it is, and tomorrow you will see why, since there is one more lever I have not touched yet. The one he has no idea still runs through me. By the time the sun cleared the neighbor's roof, I had already decided that today would not be another round of me reacting to their performances or cleaning up the mess behind their speeches. Because while he and his efficient wife spent years telling people I am the one who loves drama, what they never accounted for was the boring, unglamorous paperwork I kept alive even when I was exhausted. And buried in that stack was the lever he assumed had disappeared when he changed the locks on a house I no longer wanted, a lever with my name on it that connected directly to the money he uses to fuel big gestures and smooth over the rough edges that always seem to appear when applause is required. When we were still married and trying to look competent while the floor shifted under our feet, the bank offered a home equity line with a rate that looked friendly and rules that seemed simple. And because I handled the signatures and the calendar and the insurance riders and every dull adult thing he found beneath him, the line was opened with both our names and with a clause that said either borrower could suspend access if risk changed. And then life did what it does, we split. He kept the house because optics mattered to him more than air, the refinance kept getting pushed because the rate was good and because he liked the idea of a safety net he pretended he built. And I let it ride because I did not want to spend another season at a conference table explaining myself to a man who sits across from me and acts like I am a clerk, yet in the quiet after that dinner, when I put my card back in my wallet and felt the bruise of being told not to speak while I paid for the room, I pulled up the account, read the clause again, and saw my way through. The woman at the bank was kind without being nosy, and when she verified that my name was still on the line and that no refinance had ever removed me, she explained the process with the steady tone of someone who has seen 100 versions of this story. So I completed the request to suspend draws pending review of risk and insurance, which is a neat way of saying I closed the tap he uses when he needs to look generous, and I did it without a speech, without a threat, without a single sentence. That could be forwarded to a group chat with a caption about how unstable I am, because the system he trusted to keep me quiet was the same system that gave me the right to say no, and I finally used it. Before anyone starts clutching pearls about cruelty, I will tell you the truth, which is that I left enough room for what matters to our daughter. Because I put in writing that any draw tied to necessary repairs required by insurance would be considered if he sent the estimate to me and the carrier at the same time, and I did not touch the escrow. He needs to keep the roof insured. But I drew a hard line at anything that looks like lifestyle or image, so when his wife submits a reimbursement for another event under the heading community engagement, the answer from the bank will be a polite decline followed by a number she can call that rings to a woman who will tell her I am not available for underwriting theatrics anymore. Then I opened the folder with the tax transcripts that I requested months ago when my gut told me he had been claiming things he should not. And I drafted the amended returns that correct the years where he took credits tied to tuition and dependency while telling anyone who would listen that I was just along for the ride. And I did it not to hurt him, but to put the facts on record where letters with government seals speak louder than cocktail anecdotes, and I sent a copy to my accountant with instructions to file when I confirm one last piece, which is a dry way of saying he is about to meet the version of me that does not raise her voice. She just puts ink on paper and lets the mail do the rest. You can call this revenge if you want, and honestly, I will not argue, because there is a particular joy in using the tools that were always mine to stop funding my own erasure. And when my phone started trilling again with his name, and then with unknown numbers that look like borrowed phones, I let it go and I listened to one voicemail where his wife alternated between brittle politeness and sharp little warnings about how this will look, while in the background he tried to prompt her like a coach, and I laughed into my sleeve, not because any of this is funny, but because the performance is always the same. The show where they shout fire only when the hose they assumed I would keep holding finally lowers to my side. The first true tremor came from our daughter, and it landed not as an accusation, but as a question that knocked the wind out of me. Because she asked if I had canceled something and then stumbled over the details before saying that plans for a celebration trip just got paused and that there is a situation with the house because the bank emailed a notice about a temporary review. And she sounded young and scared and angry all at once, and I stood there with the phone in my hand and told her that tuition is secure, housing is secure, and that anything necessary for safety will be handled, but that I am done being the silent sponsor of anyone's show. And she exhaled a shaky breath like she was hearing me for the first time instead of hearing the version of me they offer when it suits them. I ended the day by printing a single clean letter that gives him a deadline to refinance the line and release me fully, or I will proceed with the formal closure permitted under the terms we both signed. And I slid a copy to his inbox and another by certified mail, and I set a reminder for the date that matters, and then I turned my phone face down again, because the next act is not an argument or a scene or a tearful summit in a restaurant. The next act is a knock at my door that I can already hear, because people like him do not stay on the phone when their tricks stop working. They show up with a new story and a generous offer, and I am ready to open that door and say one long sentence he will not be able to spin. By the time the first ring finished crawling across the screen and the second started elbowing its way in front of it, I had already decided that today would not be another day where I sprint toward a fire I did not start and then get blamed for the smoke. So when I woke to a wall of missed calls and voicemails that stacked into a kind of panic sculpture, with my daughter's name appearing over and over and ending in that last line that said, "Please talk to me," in a voice that was trying to be brave and still sounded like the kid who used to ask for one more chapter even when her eyes were closing, I set the phone down face first and told myself out loud that I would respond when the terms were clean and not a second before. Because answering in the middle of their chaos has always been the trap they set, and I have stepped into it too many times to pretend I do not know where it sits. There were messages from him that wore the costume of reason and then tripped on their own impatience, the kind that begin with "we should all be adults about this" and end with "you will regret making this difficult." And there were notes from his wife that slid between cheerleader and hall monitor, first insisting that the family image matters right now and then warning that optics can turn on people who seem uncooperative. And running through the middle of all of it were texts from my daughter. That did not sound coordinated so much as ripped out in pieces, a few sharp and unfair because fear makes you mean, and then a few that softened into questions about what I had changed and whether the school bill and the housing and the meal plan were still safe. And I stood at the sink with my hands on the counter, and I felt every old reflex push forward, the one that says fix this quickly so no one is scared, and I let that reflex pass like a wave that I did not have to jump into this time. Because I had already done the adult part last night when I separated needs from performances. I wrote one long text to my daughter, and I read it 3 times before I sent it, because I wanted the words to land like a floor and not a fight, and I told her that tuition and housing are secured, and that anything genuinely required for school is protected, that I love her and I am here, and that I will talk whenever she is ready to meet without a speakerphone, without an audience, and without anyone coaching from the edge of the room, and I added that I would not argue about the dinner or rehearse blame, that I would only explain what I changed and why, and that from this point forward the only people who can move my money or my decisions are me and her together. And I ended it with a simple line that said, I am protecting the boring things that keep your life steady, and I am done funding the show that makes me disappear, which is not poetry and not a threat. Just a boundary written like a contract that even a scared heart can understand. While I waited, I did one more thing that felt small and turned out to be much larger in the space it opened. Because months ago the development office at her university had harvested my name for a donors list that her stepmother loved to wave around when she introduced herself as part of the leadership circle. And I had let it slide because I told myself it helped my daughter to have adults cheering for her in public, but this morning I wrote a clean, calm email to the director that said I am redirecting my annual gift to an emergency book fund in my daughter's department that any student can access through a faculty signature, that I do not grant permission for my name to be used on parent council material or for any non-relative to represent my household in a leadership capacity, and that any acknowledgement should list only me and, if she chooses, my daughter. And I asked them to remove the other woman from the family council roster that had been populated off my donation, not to humiliate her but to end the stage she built on my wallet, and within an hour I received a polite confirmation that the gift was moved, the roster updated, and the acknowledgement corrected, and I will not lie to you. Reading that message settled something in me that years of arguing never touched, because this was not about winning a scene, it was about reclaiming the ground on which scenes were being staged. His next call came from an unknown number that I recognized as a borrowed phone, and when I let it go to voicemail, he finally wrote a line that said, "We need to resolve this before it damages Grace's opportunities," using our daughter's name like leverage the way he always has when he wants access, and I answered with one sentence that a lawyer could admire for how little it gives away. I said that all educational obligations are funded and ring-fenced, that any non-essential expenses routed through me are suspended indefinitely, and that any conversation about money will occur only in writing between the 2 legal parents, with our daughter copied when appropriate. And then I put the device back down and I closed my laptop because if I kept touching tools I would be tempted to keep building, and the point of today was not constant motion, it was to let silence do the work I have always expected speeches to handle. Late afternoon, my daughter texted that she could come by if I would see her, and I told her I would, and I added the terms one more time. No one else, no speakerphone, no ambush in my driveway, and there was a pause long enough for me to count my breaths. And then she wrote that she was alone and that she wanted to understand what I changed and that she needed to tell me something she had not said out loud because she was scared of picking a side and losing the other. And while I was reading that, an email from the development office chimed again confirming that the council roster had already been updated on the website and that her stepmother's name had been removed from the leadership page that she loved to screenshot. And the very next second my doorbell rang once, steady and unafraid, and I walked to the door knowing I had already taken back the ground under our conversation and that whatever came out of her mouth next would not be swallowed by the show around us, and I opened it to my daughter's face and a silence that held the shape of a confession I did not yet know. When I opened the door and found my daughter standing there with the kind of careful posture people use when they are not sure if they will be welcomed or measured, I took one step back and let her come in on the terms I had already set, which meant no speakerphone, No audience, and no one circling the block waiting to be summoned as a closer, and I watched her set her phone face down on the entry table the way I had done that morning, which told me she had come to talk and not to tape a performance for someone else to review, so I walked her to the kitchen and poured water and waited. Because the first minutes after you redraw the map are the ones where people either start reading the new directions or decide to keep driving into the ditch they secretly prefer. She started with the thing that had been burning her throat since the dinner, and it came out messy and honest, a confession rolled together with anger and confusion and love. Because she told me that the line about not speaking was not an accident and not a momentary lapse. It was the script she had been hearing all week in the ramp-up to graduation, where the emphasis was on keeping images clean and gratitude visible and conflict invisible, and that the celebration trip had been planned with a swipe of a card tied to a line I supposedly no longer touched, but that the bank review had paused it and sent his house into a small panic that ended in a fight in which he said things about obligations and appearances that made her stomach hurt. And that she had believed for a long time I did not care about being there as long as payments landed on time, which is a lie that feels like truth when you live inside someone else's performance long enough, and she looked at me with that exhausted honesty people get when they have run out of excuses and said she was scared that picking me meant losing whatever piece she had left, and I told her there is no peace in a room where the volume knob is on someone else's wall. I explained what I had changed in the plainest language I could because I wanted her to hear stability and not punishment, and I said that tuition and housing are secured in a ring that no one can cut without me and her together. That any expense that looks like a stage or a photo op or a perk is suspended indefinitely. That the university now knows my gift goes to a student emergency book fund in her department that any kid with a faculty signature can use, which means my money is finally working the way I intended instead of washing someone's title, and that any conversation about financial decisions will live in writing between the two legal parents with her copied when appropriate. And I added that I would not trade one kind of control for another because I am not building a new leash. I am building a door we both can lock and unlock together, which is what adults do when they love each other and want the other person to keep theirs fine. She asked what happens to the house and the line and the trip and all the other shiny pieces that used to show up when a camera was nearby. And I told her the truth that the certified letter on the table gives him a clean deadline to refinance and release me, or I will proceed with the formal closure the contract allows. And that if he does not like those terms, he can have his lawyer call mine because I am done negotiating feelings around money that I am responsible for when the bill arrives. And I reminded her again in the same breath that anything the carrier marks as necessary for safety is okay with me if he sends the estimate to both me and the insurer at the same time. Because I will not use a roof to score points even when those points are begging to be scored, and she nodded the way you nod when your idea of a person tilts a few degrees toward reality and does not fall over. Right on cue there was a knock that sounded like a performance warming up, and when I opened the door he launched into the speech he thinks makes him look like a leader under pressure. A long sweep about opportunities and optics and the importance of family unity in moments like this, and I let him run for longer than politeness requires. Because I wanted him to exhaust the script he had prepared before I said the single sentence that mattered, which was that the bank review and the donor roster and the development council and the bursar policies and the federal amendments are all already in motion, and none of them require his belief to be real. And while he was forming his next argument, both our phones buzzed with a university email announcing this year's parent acknowledgments, including the new book fund attribution with my name alone and, if she chooses later, my daughter's. And beneath it a small note that the parent council roster had been corrected, and I watched his face register the moment a stage collapses when the electric bill is paid by the person you told to sit in the dark. Then I told him that any future message to me about money would be in writing, and that if he wanted to talk about our daughter we could do it with respect or we would not do it at all, and then I closed the door before he could rearrange himself into a new pose. My daughter did not cheer and I did not gloat. We sat at the table like two people who had both been embarrassed and both wanted to grow up at the same time, and she asked if there was a way to help me keep the lines clean without feeling like she was betraying anyone. So I handed her my laptop and we wrote 3 things together: a joint email to the bursar confirming that all third-party proxies are revoked unless approved by both of us in writing, a short note to the development office, thanking them for redirecting the gift and asking that any future invitations be sent to me or to her directly with no substitutes, and a text to the family group that said school essentials are handled by mom and me. Please do not route requests through other people, which was the quietest sentence in the thread and the one that changed the room because it told everyone that the door they used to slip through is now locked from the inside. Before she left, she said she wanted a do-over, not a performance dinner and not a speech with microphones, just a small meal where she could tell me about the part of graduation that felt like hers. And I said yes with one condition that sounded like a joke and was not, which was that if anyone told me not to speak again, they would have to do it from the sidewalk. And she laughed, and then she cried in that silent way that is not a scene. And she hugged me like a person who chooses, and I felt the thing I have been chasing for years settle exactly where it belongs, not in an argument one, but in a structure rebuilt, because the revenge I wanted was never a public humiliation or a viral story. It was this: the moment the machine that ran on my labor and my money stopped spinning unless I touched the switch. The moment the words "he is the father figure she chose" lost their power, because the truth had finally been said out loud in my kitchen, which is that I am the mother she chose and also the woman who learned to stop financing her own disappearance. And if anyone thinks that is too far, they are welcome to keep paying for their own erasure and call it unity, while I sit here with the door closed, the bills paid, the records clean, and the plan finally finished the way I always meant to finish it.